The military only learned about the second hijacked aircraft at the very moment it crashed into the South Tower of the World Trade Center at 9:03 a.m. The nearest jet fighters were still a long way off.
I guess we were probably about 60 miles out, 70 miles out from Manhattan, and that's when they came back and said the second aircraft just hit the World Trade Center. Obviously, that was a shock to me because I thought there was only one. There wasn't a cloud in the sky, and it was probably better than 100 miles visibility, so from where we were, you could see everything very, very clearly. You could see both buildings burning.
Officers at the Northeast Air Defense Sector had still not heard from FAA headquarters. At 9:08 a.m., Mission Crew Commander Kevin Nassipany began improvising the air defense of North America.
This is what I foresee that we probably need to do. We need to talk to FAA. We need to tell them if this stuff's going to keep on going, we need to take those fighters, put them over Manhattan. That's the best thing. That's the best play right now.
There were a lot of things going through my mind, whether I was going to have to force aircraft down, was I was going to have to shoot it down. My whole goal is to stop what was happening.
People lose track of how much chaos there was. We were in a situation that was just a mess, you know, and we were trying to get our arms around it a little bit.
The chaos on 9/11 was not just in the sky. Some of the worst confusion was around the president. Another huge command and control failure on 9/11 was on the political side. The president, of course, was visiting a school in Florida that morning. After hearing about the first crash into the World Trade Center, he insisted on carrying on with his planned activities. At 9:05 a.m., his chief of staff, Andrew Card, told him the second plane had hit the second tower, that America was under attack. He famously did nothing for almost 7 minutes. He later said he was trying to project an image of calm. Meanwhile, at the White House, there was total confusion. Counterterrorism Director Richard Clark arrived at the mansion at the same time as news of the second plane hitting. He realized the president was not there and went immediately to the office of the vice president.
The vice president asked, "What do you think's going on?" And I said, "It's pretty clear to me when two buildings get hit simultaneously, more or less simultaneously, by two large aircraft. This is a terrorist attack, which means it's al-qaeda, because no other terrorist organization has that kind of capability and intent." I also suggested to him it wasn't over, and the president was 1,000 miles away.
The president was now in an adjacent classroom with his staff, watching the events in New York on television. He was on the phone with the White House.
We asked the president to stay away, not to return to Washington, because as far as we were concerned, Washington could be a combat zone. And the last thing in the world we wanted was the president to fly into a place that was about to blow up.
The story of what went on behind the scenes with the president that day is still filled with mystery and controversy. Bush made his first televised statement to the nation at 9:30.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is a difficult moment for America.
And then his Secret Service bodyguards were supposed to whisk him away to Air Force One. Unfortunately, it turns out that the motorcade sped off in the wrong direction. After several kilometers, the Secret Service had to perform an embarrassing U-turn in order to head for the airfield. Inside the presidential limousine, there was more chaos. The president was trying to speak to his staff at the White House, but all the secure telephone lines were down. The communication system overloaded. Mr. Bush was reduced to trying to contact Washington on a borrowed cell phone, but even that didn't work.
But the president said to us, I could not get, for a while we just broke, the communications from the White House broke down, and I couldn't reach them. They couldn't reach me. And that was scary on both sides, because the president is the only one who can give certain orders that need to be given.
Mr. Bush expected the communications problem to be solved when he boarded Air Force One in Florida at 9:45 a.m. But the phones there worked only sporadically.
In the case of any kind of an attack on the United States, what you're supposed to do is get the president off the ground. And Air Force One then becomes the command center. And the president is then safe and is commanding the forces of the United States from the air. The communications didn't work.
The president's senior advisor, Karen Hughes, was trying to call him through the White House switchboard.
And the operator came back, and I remember his voice was kind of shaky, and he said, "Ma'am, we cannot reach Air Force One." And that was a very, very frightening moment, because, of course, I'd never had that happen before.
On September 11th, not only was the president out of touch, the White House was left unprotected. At 9:30 a.m., 2 more jet fighters took off from Langley Air Force Base near Washington. But due to mistaken communication, they were given a flight plan which took them east out over the ocean. They went almost 250 kilometers in the wrong direction. In the White House, Richard Clark was wondering why there were no jet fighters overhead.
We certainly asked right away for combat air patrol. I would guess that probably the Defense Department had already requested it. It seemed like it took forever.
Things were about to get worse. Shortly after 9 a.m., American Airlines realized that another of their planes, Flight 77, was probably hijacked. Again, relaying the news to the U.S. military would be delayed, this time by half an hour. Lieutenant Colonel Steve O'Brien of the Minnesota Air National Guard happened to be in the Washington area that day. He took off from Andrews Air Force Base at 9:30 in a C-130 cargo plane. Unaware of what was going on, he was pointing out the sights of the national capital to his crew. Then air traffic controllers asked him to look out for the American Airlines plane. In fact, the hijacked aircraft was about to collide with him.
At that time, we had been converging to the point where he had started to roll up into about a 45-degree bank turn and was almost filling up our entire windscreen. It was fairly close. I'd say, within a half mile or so. Then maybe 5-10 seconds later, they came back and asked us if we still had them in sight, and if we did, they'd like us to follow the aircraft. And that was strange, because I've never, in 20-some years of flying, have I been asked to follow an aircraft, especially a commercial aircraft.
American Airlines Flight 77 would crash into the Pentagon at 9:37 a.m.
We saw the explosion, and I knew right away what had happened. The way it hit the Pentagon, it didn't look like it was an accident. I mean, most pilots, if they've got an emergency going on in their aircraft, they're going to do everything they can to avoid populated areas, and certainly avoid, hitting a big building if they can.
After the Pentagon was hit, Richard Clark gave the order to evacuate the White House.
Evacuate the White House.
On a given day, there are probably a couple thousand people in that area. And we evacuated all of that very early on. Just told people to leave and get out of the city.
As almost everyone was rushing out of the White House, the president's senior advisor, Karen Hughes, was on the way in.
I walked in and there was no one there. Everyone that I'd seen had guns drawn, looking as if they were ready to, use them if need be, and so I didn't want to surprise anyone.